this is why we actually have to use the charisma pattern. This is why we need to bring in words from every single language library, because we want to be able to speak to and be heard by everyone. We want everybody in our audience to feel as though we were speaking the same language. You can break down the barriers and truly connect with the people that you want to connect with. Igniting all the senses and wrapping up an entire room, isn't that worth it? Welcome to episode 26, Story Shaping 103, the Charisma Pattern. Now, you can probably tell that I'm a little bit more excited than usual with this, and that's because this one was a game changer for me, and I am hoping that it's going to be a game changer for you as well. But before we start, wherever you are listening to me, I need you to pause, I need you to stop, and I need you to make me a promise that what I share in this episode, you are going to use for good and not for evil, because this thing is so powerful. It's a conversation I can't wait to have with you. And the reason I want you to bring it to your attention is because there are conversations we have that just don't go to plan. But some of those conversations that we have as well is we walk away from them thinking, it's like we're speaking a different language. We walk away perplexed and confused because technically we both speak English or whatever our language is. Technically we're from the same country, wherever that may be. Technically we seem to have the same sort of background. But I feel as though we were speaking completely different languages. Now, the reason why you feel this, and it is a state of confusion, let's be honest, the reason why you feel this is because not only do you feel as though you are speaking a different language, the truth is that you are speaking a different language. When I was learning to speak professionally, one of the things that was really interesting was, number one, we were told that we needed to actually rehearse our topic. And we'll talk about that in a later episode about the changes I've made to that strategy. But the reason we were told to rehearse and to know our speech so damn well that we could repeat it in our sleep was because we needed to be able to change it whenever we had a different audience. So the whole key to speaking successfully and to wrapping up a room every time we spoke and to holding that position of influence where people would follow us was we needed to get to know each individual audience intimately and to change our content to match them, right? Which, to be really blunt, is freaking exhausting. And it also means that you never get to the stage of being consistent and dependable, the things that make you referable and rebookable, right? These are the things that we need to actually do. We do need to be able to wrap up a whole room, but doing it the way we were taught to 20 years ago is like not just a complete waste of time, but it's exhausting, right? So then the question is, how do we do that? And what on earth has this got to do with the language we speak and the conversations we have? Well, let me take you there. It's because we are actually speaking a different language based on our representational systems. Now, some of you will already know about the representational systems. These are things like visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, which are the three that most people know. These representational systems are about how we make sense of the world. So we have 6 of them. We have 6 key representational systems, and we all have a primary representational system. Those 6 representational systems are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, the ones that we all know. Then comes auditory digital, which many of us know, and also olfactory and gustatory. So I'm just going to run you through very quickly how we know what they are. So with visual, it's all about what we see. With auditory, it's all about what we hear. With kinesthetic, it's all about what we feel. And for some people, it's touch. For some people, it's do. And for some people, it's what they feel inside. With auditory digital, it's all about the data and the process. With olfactory, it's all about smell. And with gustatory, it's all about taste. I like to say with olfactory and gustatory, they're such small percentages of the population, but I relate them this way. Gustatory, which is all about taste, is actually how a toddler explores. A baby, when they're first exploring, everything goes in their mouth, yeah? Right? So other than when they're teething, which those of us who have children will understand, it's like everything goes into their mouth. And it's because as children, we are igniting all of our representational systems. So we sometimes put things in our mouth to understand their texture, their taste, to make sense of it. The other one, which is a small part of the population, is olfactory. And I relate this to my previous sister-in-law. She loved smell. She would smell your hair. She would smell your perfume. She was sensitive to smell. She could tell if someone was sick from their smell. She loved smell. She was driven by smell. Now, that is not weird and creepy. That is olfactory. That is how she makes sense of the world, right? So it's a really, really important thing that we understand what all these representational systems mean. And one of the quickest ways to understand is when you say to someone, let's go to the beach, or what do you think of when I say, let's go to the beach? Their response will quite often give you a really strong indicator into that as to what their representational system is. They'll describe what they see. They describe what they feel. They'll describe the feeling of the water, the heat of the sun. They'll describe the sound of the birds, the noise of the waves. So those sorts of things can actually tell us what representational system people are. Some people will describe, oh God, we've got to do this. We've got to do that. We've got to get in the car. We've got to go to the beach. We've got to find a park. We've got to unpack the car. We've got to get back in the car. We've got to come home. We've got to, clean the sand out. We've got to clean the salt off. All that that response is auditory digital. It's about data and process. So it's a really quick way of telling this. What is really unique, even for those people who understand that there are 6 representational systems, people think there's only 3 primary ones, but there's actually 4, which is the first 4, the visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and auditory digital. With those representational systems, what is not known by too many people is that each one of those has a language library. And this is the key to understanding why you sometimes feel like you're speaking a different language. So whatever your primary representational system is, you will predominantly speak in the language of that representational system. So for me, I'm a visual kinesthetic synapse, but just slightly more visual than kinesthetic. And a visual kinesthetic synapse means that we actually rank the same on both visual and kinesthetic. But my language is predominantly visual. And I was first made aware of this when I was actually delivering my first workshop, which is about 15 years ago now. And I was running as a pro bono to test out the content. It was all around goal setting. And I had the feedback forms so I could understand the feedback and what people liked and what people don't. And one of the women wrote on the bottom of her feedback form, amazing workshop, but if you're going to be truly successful in this, you're going to have to learn to speak in more than visual language. Now, 15, 20 years ago, my reference to visual language was computer programming. And I was so confused because I was like, what is she talking about? But it sent me down a rabbit hole of discovering all of this. She actually gave me one of the greatest gifts on this planet, because without knowing that, I would have gone years, maybe a whole lifetime without understanding it. So you will speak in primarily visual. So I will speak in words that are all about seeing, right? And a kinesthetic person will speak in words that are all about feeling, right? Can you feel me? Can you get a hold of that? I mean, if I just go back to visual for a moment, I will quite often say, can you see what I'm saying? Right? You can't see the words coming out of my mouth. So that question actually makes no sense. But for the way I process the world, it makes perfect sense. So visual is all about what I see. Kinesthetic is all about what I feel. Auditory is all about what I hear. Auditory digital is all about the process and the data. Olfactory is all about what I smell. And gustatory is all about what I taste. So you take those first 4, they each have language libraries. And all those words are in that likeness. Now, how do we bring the charisma pattern in? The charisma pattern is really important. And the first thing I want to do for you is to give you a clearer understanding of what charisma is. Because so many people think that charisma is all about the way people show up, all about the way they dress, how attractive someone is. And that absolutely does build into it. But pure charisma is based on the words that we use, right? It's based on the language that we use. It's based on how we put words together. And whilst it's becoming more commonly accepted that charisma is based on language, one of the most interesting things I used to get challenged on in my rooms was, no, charisma is not that. Charisma cannot be about words. And so my response to that I'm going to share with you here is this. Have you ever heard of catfishing? So for those of you that haven't, catfishing is something that happens when somebody deliberately gets somebody else to fall in love with them and then either disappears or show up as somebody that they're not. Now, the interesting thing with that is that the person who has been a catfish will quite often still love the other person deeply, even though they are not who they said they were. And the reason being is that they've fallen in love with the words, with the language, with the conversations. They haven't fallen in love with how that person looks. They haven't fallen in love with how that person shows up in the world. Sometimes they haven't even fallen in love with the person of the same gender. They've fallen in love with the words that are being used. And this is where charisma, the heart of charisma, sits. Now, when I first discovered the charisma pattern, and trust me, I'm getting to it, I was so excited about it. So first of all, I went down this rabbit hole about visual language, and I discovered these 4 language libraries that directly relate to the representational systems. But then I discovered the charisma pattern, and I was so excited about it. And when I discovered the charisma pattern was 10 to 15 years ago. And what was really interesting was I had a family member at the time who was in Los Angeles, and she was actually one of the head writers for HBO. Her name was Margaret. And we used to have Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon Skype conversations. And quite funny, because when I think back, I think both of us used to be drinking wine. And depending on when the conversation was, at least one of us was well and truly before midday. But the conversations were amazing. And when I discovered the charisma pattern, I was so excited. I couldn't wait to share with her what I had learned. And what she said has stuck with me to this day. Remembering her role, head writer for HBO, she has won an endless array of awards for content that she's created, particularly in dramatic movies and that sort of genre. And what she said to me floored me. She said, "Oh, you're kidding. You're only just learning that? We learned that in the first year of film school. This is not new. This is known. This is what the great speechwriters and the great script writers have always known. Yes, some people invoke the charisma pattern naturally, but for the rest of us, it's a learned technique." Now, what is the charisma pattern? The charisma pattern is quite simply that we speak in language that crosses all 4 language libraries, right? So this is one of the reasons why we script. We will script in our natural language, in that language that is our predominant language. So for me, it's visual. What I do is I don't try to change it on the way. I naturally write the script. That will come up predominantly visual. It doesn't anymore because I've built this muscle, but back when I was learning about this. Now, what we do is we swap words in and out from across the language libraries. So if I'm always saying see, I will change some of those C's out for hear or feel or understand. And so they're the words that I swap in and out. We've got a downloadable for you against this episode, which has a very baseline language library for you. And that is enough for you to get started on actually mastering the charisma pattern, because this is the way that we wrap up a room. This is the way that we make sure that everybody can hear us. This is the way that we make sure that everyone feels as though we're speaking their language. It is not in how we show up. It is not in customizing and tailoring our speaking. It is not in understanding how we actually customize to a specific audience demographic. This is actually using language to connect through the charisma pattern. But let me make it more real for you. When we present, when we are speaking, we're actually presenting in auditory mode. Yes, we might have slides. Yes, we might have video, but predominantly we're speaking at and to people. We are in auditory mode. Our language that we use, without knowing this about the charisma pattern, our language that we use will be in our representational system. So in my case, I speak in auditory mode and I use visual language. Generally speaking, auditory is 15% of the population. Now, there are distortions for certain demographics, and I get that. I'm talking in generalizations here. Generally speaking, auditory will be 15% of any population. So the very fact that we're speaking and we're using auditory modalities to deliver our knowledge and our content means that we're connecting with about 15% of the audience. Kinesthetic is 40% of the population. I don't have kinesthetic language naturally, so if I'm speaking in my natural state, I'm missing 40% of the audience. Visual would be 45% of the population in general terms. Yay, I'm visual. So between visual and auditory, I'm only covering 60% of the audience. So this is why we actually have to use the charisma pattern. This is why we need to bring in words from every single language library, because we want to be able to speak to and be heard by everyone. We want everybody in our audience to feel as though we were speaking the same language. And when you are speaking the same language, when it is felt that that is what you do, you can cross cultural barriers, you can cross understanding barriers, you can cross demographic barriers, you can break down the barriers and truly connect with the people that you want to connect with. We touched on this already in the story, Secrets of Story Activation, just previously in the previous episode. We touched on this. We talked about igniting all the senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What What are you noticing? What's the smells? What's the taste? What's the things around you? This is all playing into the same thing. This is all playing into the charisma pattern, igniting all the senses and wrapping up an entire room. Isn't that worth it? There are no hard and fast rules in how you do this. There is no change 25% of your content out. There is no within every 100 words or 500 words have the 4 representational systems and their language libraries represented. There is no hard and fast rules on this. What matters is that you actually make sure that there is an even spread of the different language libraries throughout your presentation. This is literally how you make your speeches universally heard and your audiences universally seen, as if you were speaking the same language across the board. And this is why understanding and practicing the charisma pattern is a total game changer.